Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Joe Chris, and I'm from the not-for-profit social enterprise called Opus Independence that runs the Festival of Debate. The Festival of Debate started on April the 13th and runs till May the 26th and involves over 70 events, 150 speakers, over 60 partner organisations, to bring people together to discuss the key social, economic and political issues of the day. I'm very pleased to have our special guest with us this evening, Vanessa Andreotti, who's going to be talking about her book, Hospicing Modernity. And just on a sort of personal note, for all of us at Opus and the Festival of Debate, her work's been a great inspiration for us over the past year. So we're really pleased she's been able to join us. And we're very lucky that Habiba has agreed to chair this evening's In Conversation, who works for an amazing organisation called Lankelly Chase. So I'd just like to invite Habiba and Vanessa to turn their video and their microphones on, and I will hand over to you, Habiba.
Thank you so much, Joe. And thank you so much, Vanessa. I'm very excited to be here and to have this conversation. And so how we're going to do it is I'm going to pose some questions to you, Vanessa, and you're going to help us to unpick things. And then maybe 40 minutes in, we'll invite some questions from folk who are participating. And yeah, so I'm just going to really get into it. But before I get into it, I just really want to welcome you. And I'm just going to say, Nsanyu Senyo Okulaba. That's how we greet in Luganda, in my mother tongue. And it's just a kind of a sincerely welcoming you to this space. Thank you. And we would also do to just welcome you and give you all that love. So I'm very happy to be here. And just gonna dive in because I'm just keen to hear from you. And so the first thing I'm going to ask is, for those who have read Hospicing Modernity and those who haven't read it, what are you inviting us into? And what is hospicing? What is modernity? First time I heard that word modernity, I was thinking of those French white dudes. So now I want to hear it from you. And why is it relevant in these times?
Habiba, thank you so much for the question. Thank you, Joe, for the invitation. I will start by saying that I am speaking from the territory of the Lakwangan-speaking Indigenous peoples in what is currently known as Victoria in Canada at the University of Victoria. And because I come also from mixed heritage, what we do, what I've been taught to do is a land acknowledgement that actually takes a whole day. But I've kind of summarized it into four things that actually illustrate what I'm inviting you to do. So the first invitation is to acknowledge the land as a living entity, not a property or a resource to be exploited or used or managed or owned. It's something that we're part of. So we tend to live our lives through social constructs, human constructs of identity, of community, of collectivity, of nation, and of systems that are currently jeopardizing our future. Or the future of human and non-human generations. Actually, it has exterminated already many other species. So the acknowledgement of the land as a living entity and as something we're part of is the first invitation of the book, that the human constructs we live by are currently dead-end stories that are already dying stories that are offshooting the limits of the planet and putting us on a path of premature extinction, the humans, and already causing the extinction of other species. So that's the first one. The second acknowledgement is the acknowledgement that the acknowledgement of our ancestors and the responsibilities we have towards our ancestors. So ancestors are not just those who have come before, but also those who are yet to come. So this is an acknowledgement that asks us to see ourselves as part of a continuum, not just our embodied lives in specific bodies is a temporal thing. So we have responsibilities both back and forth, and sometimes the responsibility back is to interrupt some inheritances and compost some shit that has been passed down, and do some repair and reparation in that sense. But we have a responsibility towards the future as well, of seeing what we have as borrowed from future generations. And I'm not here talking only about human beings. I'm talking about our ancestors, not as just humans, so that we can see ourselves as part of a wider metabolism that is the planet. So that's the second acknowledgement. Then there's a third acknowledgement, which is the acknowledgement that for us to be here today talking online, this is a result of a lot of violence that we are complicit in and implicated in. So if we think about the communities where the minerals for the computers have been mined, and the land itself, and the suffering of the land, and where these computers are going to go, and all the networks that of technology that have been necessary for us to be here. That's just one example. But if we think about our food, our clothes, our patients, our healthcare system, everything that we take for granted as comforts or entitlements or benefits or even entertainment, they are sourced through processes of systemic, historical, and structural violence. So we have a responsibility in relationship to that violence. And the invitation of the book is for us to be able to sit with that without feeling overwhelmed, or without feeling immobilized, without feeling demanding quick fixes, or to be rescued from that discomfort. So we have to be able to sit with that reality in order to use it as leverage for accountability. And the system that has created all of this, it's unsustainable. It's not, so the planet cannot take this for that long or indefinitely. So it's a system that is already in decline because of its own, it's intrinsically already, it's embedded, its decline is embedded in its system. It's not somebody who's gonna just bring it down, right? So how do we live in times of the system's death? And how do we hospice the system so that it has a good death? And a good death means that it is a death with integrity, where it can teach the lessons of its life, the hard ones, as well as its gifts, the good ones too, right? So hospicing the system is different from killing the system, and it's different from changing the system. It is a very different process. And it means that we do not invest in the futurity of the system. And at the same time that we hospice something, we give prenatal care to something that is being born. And the book challenges people to not think about themselves as the one who are going to birth the system, but something that the earth itself is birthing. And in that sense, the book invites us to see the earth as a living entity and a conscious being that can speak and dream through us, if we care to have that channel open. And for that channel to be open, we need to declutter what is blocking that channel, what has been cluttered, our ways of relating to the land and to each other, and to language and to knowledge, and to critique in a very different way. So the last acknowledgement is the acknowledgement that we're all related. So the coalitions have been necessary, and they're still necessary to be formed. But ultimately, they also impose the divisions that have led to the problem. So figuring out ways that there is a being together yet to come, that needs to be the horizon, and it needs to be our responsibility. So figuring out that this family that we belong to is a complicated family of both human and non-human beings, and we need to grow the fuck up. Basically, I'm sorry about the language.
Oh,
but
go for it.
Basically, it is our relational immaturity, and this relational immaturity is based on cognitive and affective immaturity. And in that sense, the invitation is to see ourselves as both, not just as heads, but the metaphor is limited here, but it's useful too. So there's the head, the heart, and the gut. And because we work a lot with indigenous communities in the global south, especially in Brazil and people in the Amazon, our project actually started by asking them about education. So what we were looking at, what kind of education indigenous communities were giving their children that would keep them in the struggle, right? In the long term, in the struggle for protecting the Amazon, knowing that both the state and the mining companies and all kinds of other different factors, when that baby is born, there's a lot that's going to happen that this baby was going to have to survive. So we were kind of asking what kind of education, what's the direction of education for this child to grow into a mature being and into an elder, right? And remain in the struggle, remain committed to seeing that forest as part of themselves, and to let the forest speak through them. So one of the things that we learned very quickly is that their critique was that Western education educates the head, and they from their perspective, if you educate the head, the body follows, the behavior follows. And their education is based on a very different understanding of neurobiology, basically. So, and I'm oversimplifying here, but it's basically, it's the education of the gut. You educate the gut, the heart is filled with motivation. Based on the gut, the head follows. So it's the other way around. And so the book talks about education of the gut, which in the book we called depth education, which some people say it's death education. And that is correct. Because the problem also within our society is that we separate death as something that is terrible, it's horrible, it's over there, and we want to avoid it. But a different relationship with death, and this idea of being in a continuum is part of being able to live well. So live well, living well, to live well, and living well is inseparable from dying well. So I think that these 4 acknowledgements kind of encapsulate the invitations of the book.
Okay. Thank you. And when you say modernity, what does that mean?
So it's a very good question. And you talked about the white European discussions of post-structuralism, postmodernism. It's also coming from several sections of philosophy and linguistics. But there's also discussions in Latin America about that, of the modernity coloniality Latin American group that actually intersected with this too. So my way into the discussion was through the discussion in Latin America, Arturo Escobar, Walter Mignolo, Quijano, also Walters and Kustikanki, and in terms of academic discussions are limited, but in the post-structuralist discussions in Europe were also, I think, important as internal critiques of modernity. But modernity, in a nutshell, can be represented through the metaphor of a house. And it's a metaphor that helps bring together systemic critiques that are social, economic, and existential. But I'm not talking about existentialism, I'm talking about existence. So imagine a house and sitting on a planet, and this house is bigger, like it's becoming bigger than the planet. So modernity is a house with a foundation. It's in this foundation is a foundation where our existence is defined by separation or separability. There's this imposed sense of separation between us and the land and the planet. right? And this imposed sense of separation, which I would say is the heart of colonialism, because it colonizes our neurobiology.
Yeah.
So this imposed sense of separation creates a hierarchy of value between species, between cultures, between people. So for you to feel deserving of being alive, you need to be producing value in the ways and the economies of the house. So you need to accumulate some kind of capital. And this capital changes across history, what this capital means. But that foundation of separability that turns the land into property is the first thing about modernity. Then modernity, the house of modernity has two carrying walls. The first carrying wall is the carrying wall of the modern nation state. And here we are reminded that the modern nation state was not created to protect people. It was created to protect property and capital. And if we look at critical race theory, we're also reminded that the protection of people through the dispensation of rights, human rights, indigenous rights, civil rights, labor rights, only happened when there was interest convergence between the protection of capital and the protection of people. And when that interest convergence doesn't happen, the state goes into the protection of capital. So that's an important reminder of that house, right? That property is it's not the foundation is separability, but property is a carrying wall of the house. The other carrying wall is the carrying wall of, it's related to the intellect. It's a single story of seamless progress, development, modernization as development, and this idea of civilization, and a very specific idea of civilization, where you have people who generally people who are European or who are embracing modernity or who feel that modernity is their legacy, they are placed at the apex of time and as the standard of humanity. And then other cultures are cultures that need to catch up with the other. And if they disagree, they are either dragging process or to be eliminated. Right? So this story, this single story of progress, development, and civilization creates epistemicides. It tries to kill the other stories. And sometimes it is successful, and sometimes it isn't. The other stories persist. And the last thing about the house is the roof of the house. So the roof of the house has been different at different times in history. But today we have the roof of speculative shareholder algorithmic capitalism, global capitalism. And this roof is structurally damaged, and it's creating all kinds of problems in the walls of the house. And then we also say in the book that in different contexts, the carrying walls of the house remain the same, and the foundation remains the same, but the roof and the different decorative walls can change. And within this house, we have a basement of the people who we play with it in terms of the south of the south and the global north and global south. So we have at the penthouse of the house, the north of the north, people with historical discretionary income. And then you have in the middle of the house, the middle class, people who are trying to climb the stairs of social mobility to get to the roof of the penthouse. So the desire for the penthouse, the propaganda of the penthouse is extremely strong. And then in the basement of the house, we have people in the house, we say it's the south of the north, where people still want the protections of the house, but they are not invested necessarily, or they do not have access to the stairs of social mobility. But we also have in the planet, and imagine the house putting the sewage in the planet and extracting resources from the planet, right? So there's two arrows here, and causing dispossession, destitution, genocide, and ecocide in the planet. But in the planet, we also have people like the people in the Amazon, the Hunikui indigenous people, fighting for a different form of existence where that separability, that separation is not there, right? So they are fighting, and as the sewage of the house fills the planet, they're still fighting for us to be able to wake up, step up, and grow up to realize that this is an unsustainable situation. But maybe we will only realize that when the house actually starts to collapse around us. And as it does, one of our biggest challenges will be to deal with how we've been conditioned by the house and by the comforts of the house, right? So even as we sit with the house collapsing with all kinds of crises, housing crisis, environmental crisis, mental health crisis, we are incapacitated to even sit with reality because the house has buffered and protected us from having to do that. Whereas the people who have been fighting have not been protected. And so they didn't have the buffer. And that's why we went there to talk about education in the first place, right? Very sad. In Brazil, we have the saying, which is also in the book, about so we say that it's only impossible in the situation of a flood where the waters are rising, which they are, it's only possible to swim if the water reaches your bum. Before that, it's too low. So you can only walk and wade, right? But if the water reaches the bum, then you need to learn to swim. So what we say in the book is that the indigenous people who have been part of the struggle for a different form of existence, they have been swimming for 500 or more years, right? But the idea is not to go there and learn how they swim, because they swim in a different river.
Yeah.
But what they can do is remind us that our bodies can swim. Our bodies are water. We are that water rising too. So the idea is not to go and appropriate their knowledge or their stories, but to understand that something else is possible. And that's what we wanted to do with education as well. We were not there to collect their stories, and to transplant what they did there here. We were there to understand the direction and the principles that kept people alive in the struggle, because we knew that this was coming here.
Oh, wow. Thank you for that. You've started on this, and I'm just going to ask, who or what are the major actors that have created modernity? And does the process of understanding its beginning offer us insights into how it might best end?
I think the process of understanding where we've come from, where we're at, and where this is going is absolutely important in that sense. And if we look historically at what created modernity, it is much older actually than 500 years. The conceptualization of the land as property is more than 2,000 years old. And there's not just the colonization of the land, but the colonization of our relationship to knowledge, our relationship to language, our relationship to ourselves, to our unconscious, right? This is all part of what created and sustains modernity. And partly, if you look at the academic critique, you will see the role of European imperialism and colonialism having a very strong role in spreading it, in transforming it into the current version that we have of it. But if we look at ourselves today too, sometimes we look at the critique and say, okay, so there's the 1% that is profiting, right, in all these multinational corporations, and especially oil companies and pharma and all of that, and we are just the victims. But actually, we create the demands for these things. We are part, in many ways, modernity has colonized our desire. So we want this comfort, we want convenience, we want access and transportation and mobility. And it's very difficult now to say that it was just one specific group that created this. We can say that many groups have resisted it for different reasons and in different ways, but we're all part. It's been globalized in a way now that our livelihoods are underwritten by it. And it's very, very specific and even very small groups and very scarce groups of people who actually are not still not part of this. And even in the indigenous communities, the underwriting of this is also there, right? And if we look at intergenerational conversations, it's not a simple issue. It's very complex, very layered. So yeah, I think I'll stop there, but understanding its history, the different stories of its history is the first step to sitting with reality in a different way, the multiple moving layers of reality, increasing our capacity, to expanding our capacity to sit with that, so that we can learn how to most responsibly offer it the conditions for a good death.
Yeah. Thank you. When I was reading this, I was reading it on Christmas Day, 2 Christmases ago. the baby was napping, so I was there reading this book. And I say to my partners how I was deeply appreciative of the gifts of lineage that gives us to see. So, and because for me, as also as a coming from a kind of that colonized part, there's a tendency to disassociate the shame that's come with colonialism and all of that. So I'm wondering about your path into this work, both your education and your career, and also your lineage that's got you here. Yeah.
Thank you. That's the preface of the book. There's a lot about it there, but in a nutshell, so my father, he has German ancestry, and my mom has indigenous Guarani ancestry. So during the 60s, my father was the youngest of 6 brothers, and his brothers were involved in agrarian expansion in Brazil, which means indigenous genocide, basically there. So they would come back home and tell this younger brother stories about how, for example, in agrarian expansion, they would start trading with indigenous people, but they would trade blankets with chickenpox, right, for things, and wait for people to die, or poison sugar, or things that, and they would say that with pride. So his brothers would say that with pride. And my dad was horrified by the stories. So what he decided to do was to marry an indigenous woman. And also because he was exposed to cowboy films from the Americas, where he said, I don't know why they end up with the white lady when they were definitely in love with the indigenous woman. So he decided he was going to do that. He also believed in the superiority of the German race. So he was trying to do something progressive by standing up to his family, knowing that he was going to get a huge pushback, and racist at the same time. So that paradox, right, of the white savior was there from the beginning. And my mom was born in the streets. And my grandma was very much the stubborn. She was not a collective resistor. She was an individual resistor, and the kind of fuck it lady. And so she had my mom in the street. So my mom associated, and then when my mom was 2, she was adopted. So my grandma went back to a relationship that she had with a white man. So my mom associates indigeneity with this possession and precarity, and then in the white man as the savior. So when they met, I think the symbolic thing, the historical, systemic, structural thing was there, and it was a good, not good match. It was not a good match. It was a convenient match in terms of the desires constructed in this kind of systemic context, right? And my grandmother was completely against it, saying, look, what you're trading for social mobility is your freedom, and it's your integrity, right? And being carried up this ladder of social mobility has a huge cost. And by the way, it's like buying a ticket for the Titanic, because this ladder is going to collapse because the planet cannot stand it, right? So when I was born, I was told that I was too much like my grandma, because I would question everything. And being born in this kind of, as the project of colonization, right? Of being saved of everything, it was not an easy thing to carry either. So there was a lot of violence, cultural, physical, and psychological violence, geared towards fixing a bomb, right? So I remember, and that's a story I'm telling here because of you, because I know you will relate to that. But when I was 2, I got this this doll that they had, because they were working class people. They had to work really hard to buy for me this doll that could do this, and it was a blonde doll with curly blonde hair and blue eyes, right? So I remember them sitting with me, opening the present. It was Christmas, and giving me the doll and saying, "Look at her hair. Isn't it amazing, the color of her hair? Look at her eyes, they're blue." And at that point, I knew I should be like that doll, and I wasn't. So there's a photo of me holding that doll with the very, very somber expression in my face. And after that photo, I went to a bedroom, and I broke the doll, and I stomped on it, and I kicked it under the bed. Of course, at that point, I probably couldn't articulate why. And after that, I was labeled a devil child, right? For doing that. But I think that moment is when I go back to that, I think my work in education has sprung from this imposition of static parameters, of cultural, of parameters of intelligence even, right? That didn't fit my body. And seeing education as both something that reproduces these parameters and something that has the possibility of interrupting them was what motivated me to enter the profession or the discipline of education. And it still does today.
Oh, the doll. Oh, yeah.
You believe that they went to the doll, they collected the pieces of the doll, and they paid for it to be fixed. The doll still exists in their house.
Yeah.
And I'm not allowed to touch it.
Yeah. I think most of us have that story of that doll, right? It's so, yes. Yeah. Thank you. Feeling emotional about that. I was going to ask you, the collective that you're part of, gesturing towards colonial futures, the experiments you carry out, a lot to do with in the Americas, if I use that word. They're in that land. And so for those of us who are in different lands, in this case, I'm speaking from the UK, very much the heart of Britain. I don't even know which way. So UK, Britain, England, all in. Very much the land at the heart of a lot of the modernity. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or advice, reflections for those of us who might be in different lands. While I recognize modernity is like faster than thought, and it's global, and it's everywhere, it's all in the waters and the air we're all breathing in. Is there anything for those of us who are in different lands, or you think it's all the same work, or just interested to hear from you on that?
Thank you. It's a very good question. So the collective, the title of the collective is Gesturing Towards the Colonial Futures, because this language resonates, as you said, with the discussions in settler colonial contexts, right? So Canada, the US as well, and Brazil too, is a settler colonial country. But in Europe, it is a different discussion. And it needs a different entry point. It's the issues, the layers of the issues are all there, because modernity, as you said, is global. And if you're thinking about the UK, it's the heart of the British Empire, right? So, and this is the most one of the empires involved in this, but a very important one, and very recent one too. So, thinking about colonialism as just the subjugation of people and then the occupation of lands is what academically we are used to, right? But and it came from the indigenous people we're working with. The analysis there is different. If we see colonialism as the colonization of our neurobiology, right, then the discussion is much wider.
Yeah.
So I'm going to quote Chief Ninau Ahunikui, who is one of the people we work very closely with in the Amazon, who is a strong advocate against the financialization of the forest. He advocates against carbon trading, for example, and other false solutions to the climate crisis that are destroying the Amazon and other biomes. But what he says is that colonialism is a colonization of both our unconscious, right? And in this sense of separation, but also it creates an impairment. And it is an impairment of relationship. We can't relate, our guts can't connect with the wider metabolism of the planet. However, our unconscious cannot be separated. So what he says is that there is climate change happening around us and within us because we're not separate, right? So what he's warning against is that when we think about ecological collapse, because we think that humans and nature are separate, we think about the collapse around us. But what he's worried about is the collapse inside. Right? The mental health crisis that is going to make it unbearable to keep living. And that might take us to the point of killing each other. And we can see signs of that already happening, right? So he advocates for several things, but one of them, so he says, for example, that Western science and technology have developed to an advanced state in terms of building things, but they are very lacking in relational technologies, sciences and technologies, right? That of respect, reverence, reciprocity. So respect, reverence, reciprocity. There's another R. What is it? Responsibility. So it lacks these 4 R's, which then indigenous peoples have around the world for millennia. They have developed these relational sciences and technologies. And in that sense, we have been impaired in Western culture in terms of relational intelligence. So having all the science and technology for building things without having the relational intelligence to situate ourselves in terms of a wider metabolism and temporality will not help in terms of addressing the challenges we have to address today. So he's trying to offer something that asking us to rethink and re-relate to the things. And when we talk about relationality, people usually think about relationship with the environment or relationship with each other. He's talking about relationality in terms of relationship with our own selves, with language, with knowledge, of course, with other species and with everything else, but it starts here. It doesn't start there. And he warns against too this yearning for, there's a yearning for connection in all of us, right? We are not separate. So and this imposition is creating havoc in our bodies, in our souls. And what he says is that sometimes people confuse this yearning with a desire to be connected with the beauty of the land. So the whales, the flowers, the sun, the moon, and the stars, but not with the violence and the shit that is also part of it, right? So the inspiration for the book and for a course that we have called Facing Human Wrongs that goes with the book is that we need to be able, the first thing we need to do is to expand our capacity to sit with the shit and to compost it, right? To develop the stomach, to be able to sit with all aspects of reality and of humanity, the good, the bad, the ugly, the broken, and the fucked up, without turning away, without throwing a tantrum, and without throwing in the towel. Right? So we will need to figure out a way of finding joy in composting shit together.
Yeah.
And until we go there,
Yeah.
we can imagine all kinds of futures you want, but the future is not the image that we have in our heads and convince other people about. It is our capacity to weave something different and repair relationships in the present. A different future doesn't depend on the image. It depends on the capacity to weave relationships in the present. And I participate in so many climate gatherings. This is such a difficult insight to land, because people do want to see hope in the future. And I generally say, I don't have hope, I have faith. It's different. And my faith is placed on us waking up, stepping up, and growing up to be able to do the weaving. Because that's the only thing that could switch something, that could either, it's two things, maybe. So maybe we can avert disaster, or if we can't, if we're past the tipping point, we can die a better death.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you. Thank you. My wonderful colleague, Zareen, was saying that she was listening to a podcast, and you use this word collective coma. And we living in this land and trying to think about the British and colonial context. And we've just had a coronation of a man and all this stuff that is going on. And she was trying to, maybe this word collective coma might offer us something. So I just wanted to say if you could say any more about it. Yeah.
So how I relate to it.
Yes.
I work with somebody, Kasha Henneque, who's an indigenous scholar, he's a former partner, who talks about pain and pain avoidance, right? So numbing. And how the relational impairment that we have requires in Western society this numbing. And this numbing happens through an escape into an idealization. And it can be an idealization of elation or of distress. You either vilify something, or you idealize in the heroic way. So either the leader who will do something, or a monarchy that can give us a sense of stability and certainty, but people will look for that as a way to deflect or deny what they actually need to work with and what they need to deal with that is difficult. And he has a very compassionate way to approach the problem, because he says, then if this is an impairment, we need to deal with it as a disease, as an illness. Right? And how do we heal from that, basically, rather than seeing it as a moral problem and trying to, or addressing it as a problem of ignorance. It is not just ignorance. It may be a problem of denial and deflection. And that is a very different dynamic for the ego. And so if you're the same in education, if an educational problem is a problem of ignorance, you present the information and people say, oh, okay, then they change. But if they are trying to deny something and you come with that message, generally they shoot the messenger, literally, metaphorically, right? So in education that is about issues of denial, you need to bypass the defenses of the ego, so it can't be direct. It has to be an invitation into a different form of existence, but it's a very different ballgame, right? It's not just about putting the information out there or shouting the information or getting angry because people are not listening. It is a very different kind of invitation. And what we've learned so far in the experiments of the collective too, is that it's vibrational as well. So people, the invitation is not just what comes out of your mouth, is how you live your life. And what is, it's probably 80% people understanding that there is a way of not being in the stress that they are in. Right? So we have to do a lot of work on ourselves to be able to work with that, with other people, and invite them into a form of existence that can hold the weight of complexity without collapsing. So in one of the metaphors we use is that we are carrying multiple layers of complexity on our back right now, because our education system and our system in general doesn't really allow us. They go for the simple single story, right?
Yeah.
So complexities are over here, and they're breaking our backs. So there's personal complexity, intergenerational complexity, systemic complexity, historical complexity, and we just can't. So education needs to help us develop the muscles and the posture to be able to do this and put it in front of us so that we can collectively hold it. And figuring out how to do that when these stories that could have helped us to do that have been eliminated by that single story of progress, development, and civilization, right? Because our communities, like our ancestors, some generations back knew how to do this, right? To put it all in front of us. And they had processes of intergenerational processing of things.
Yeah.
And for example, in the communities that I work with, you do not share unprocessed trauma with incoming generations. You only share it with people who have been through it or who have been through something similar, who can help you compost that shit before you spread something out. Then composted shit is medicine, right? It's new soil. Then you can talk about it with younger people, but not before that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just passing the trauma.
Yeah.
Right. So all this knowledge and wisdom about holding life and death and trauma and everything in between, and grief and loss and love, is the relational impairment that Ninoa was talking about.
Thank you.
The lack of access to the stories, right?
Yeah,
That's the impairment. The relational intelligence is being able to do it all together, do this collectively, and help each other to process things.
Thank you. Gosh, so much there, so much. Yeah. I'm aware that some questions are starting to come through. So if Zareen, I've asked your question. If there's any other questions and a little voting thing, I don't quite know how it works, but I'm trusting that you're all going to know more than me. And the questions are coming up. So you can put them in there, and we can get to those in the next 10 minutes. Just one last question before we pick up another question from participants, Vanessa, is you talk about people going through high intensity struggles and low intensity struggles, and saying we need to do different work. In a lot of social justice work, they end up meeting those worlds. And I just wanted to say if there's anything you can say about the work that we do together, or how we can do that work together with integrity, knowing that some people are in high intensity struggles and others are in low intensity struggles. And that, I think, is a space when we come together, we can get it, we can really mess it up, especially those of us who are in low intensity struggles. We're so ignorant, you know? So I just really wanted some thoughts that you might have about that.
Thank you. So in the book, so remember that every time we use language, it's a kind of a shortcut for something much more complex, right? So in the book, we use the idea of high intensity struggle to refer to those, for example, the communities, Ninawa community, where you are fighting for your life every day, basically, right? So there's state-sponsored violence, there's social violence, and all kind, like it's the mining companies, it's the government, it's the land grabbers, it's everything, and it's other indigenous communities sometimes too, right? Who don't agree with you and what you're doing. So And then low intensity struggle are those people who have been buffered from the worst of this, but who are still in existential struggle, or sometimes even material struggle too, but who are not in the position of not knowing if they're going to to survive the next day, basically, right? And there are people in the global north who are also in high intensity struggle. But people in high intensity struggle probably wouldn't be reading the book because they wouldn't have the time, or the kinds of elitist literacies that allow us to read the book. So in the book, I said, when I'm working with indigenous people in high intensity struggle, or Black communities in Brazil, or here in high intensity struggle, I'm not going to use the book. They need something else completely different. And then sometimes there is a meeting and there is a clash of sensibilities, right? In terms of what one group wants and what the other group. And here, and even within low intensity struggle, there are clashes of sensibility, right? So generally what we see is that when we have, for example, here in Canada, we refer to it, and again, all kinds of wordings that we use in our metaphors are very limited, right? But here in Canada, it's BIPOC, it's Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and non-BIPOC or white people, then put them in the same place, and we want to build something together very quickly. You see the different sensibilities. And we have tried to map some of the things that both groups need to know. In order to have more patience and compassion as they meet, but also that recognize that a very heavy burden is placed on the shoulders of BIPOC people to tiptoe around the fragilities and the kind of inability to deal with reality of non-BIPOC people. So we have a couple of resources about what kinds of desires and narratives come up always when we see that clash that could help people to know what to expect and figure out and understand that we don't know yet how to be together. We will have to figure this out together, and this will involve mistakes and missteps and everything, and we will have to figure out how to create a container where there's compassion and generosity for that to happen, right? But that compassion and generosity cannot be confused with coddling, right, of people.
Yes.
So everybody needs to take several steps back. And it's different steps back for different people. We generally say too that sometimes caucusing for some time with the idea of going back is a good idea, so that we can have space to breathe and to do the internal work that we need to do so that we don't become work for other people. Right? So there is that kind of invitation, again, to grow the fuck up, right? So that we can be together for both sides. Right? For both sides. Nobody's off the hook here.
Yes.
So I will put it in the chat. So it's two resources that I'm thinking about right now. One talks about 7 steps back and 7 steps forward or aside. And the other one, we called it, it's an older one. It's called Raiders for Learning to Read the Room, or learning to read yourself, how you're being read in a room. And they have been very useful for our gatherings here to invite people to a different kind of expectation of the space, and to tell them already from the outset that there's going to be difficult conversations and it's going to be uncomfortable. And until you feel comfortable with being uncomfortable, it's going to be even more uncomfortable. But the point is to expand our capacity to sit with difficult things without feeling overwhelmed, immobilized, or demanding quick fixes, or to be rescued from discomfort.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for that and the resources. I'm aware of time. I'm very sorry. I'm not going to get to all the questions, but I'm having a look at the questions, and there's a question that's got 5 votes. So I'm going to ask it. And it's from Gail, and says, what are the British blind spots we need to be aware of when hospicing modernity in the UK?
I think this question should be for Habiba. Who's been doing this work in the UK for a long time.
Oh, wow.
On the spot.
I don't know. I think it'd be great to, let's put that in the chat. What do people think? You know, Yeah, let's kind of co-create it together right now. Yeah. What do people think of that question? Be great to hear.
You want to put it on the chat?
Yes.
Yeah, let me just open my chat.
I'll do that. And then another question that's got 3 votes, I'm going to go for the next voted one, is when you come to the experiment of the collective, what are your practices to hold with honor and integrity and be in right relationships, the indigenous communities and knowledge and principles you're learning from them?
That's a whole week of intensive immersion to be had. We do participate in a lot of ceremonies, and we have people in the Global South actually doing ceremony for this work. And that's what keeps us alive, I think, in a state of joy, actually, of working in this field that is very difficult, but with each other, having each other's backs, right? So we have each other's backs, and then there's a group of people that have our backs, and we do have access to medicines as well. So it's difficult to talk. People, yes, there are protocols, but we kind of have summarized what we've learned from indigenous communities in a compass. And the compass for us is called SMDR. It's and we see each of the words that I'm going to say as an inquiry, in a lifelong, life-wide inquiry towards becoming a good elder and ancestor for all relations, right? And ancestor is like, after we die, we are still a good ancestor. So the S is sobriety. So sobriety in this context means the interruption of harmful compulsions that have been conditioned and designed by modernity, or as coping mechanisms with modernity, because there are compulsions that are us pushing back against modernity as well, right? So we have to be very conscious of that, and when they are harmful, we need to be able to interrupt them. So sobriety is the first one. Then we have maturity. So not resisting growing up. And this means doing what is needed rather than only what we want to do, and stopping patterns of self-infantilization. Yeah, right. That sometimes, and not all the time, but sometimes it's also self-victimization. That space is it's sometimes necessary to go there, and it can become a trap or a ditch that you die in. Then there is patterns. The third one, SMDR, is discernment. And discernment is all about complexity, learning to expand our capacity to hold complexity, both individually and collectively, and also the complexity internal to the self and the complexity external to the self around you. And the last one is responsibility. And we have several discussions about responsibility around both in the sense of thinking about complicity and harm, and our accountability to interrupt it, and to disinvest in systems that are unsustainable and violent, but also the ancestral responsibility, decide about what do we have to interrupt in terms of what we have inherited, and what is our responsibility to incoming generations, responsibilities to human and non-human. And we try, so we get sometimes kernels of, for example, going into a forest and offering something, so that we acknowledge that this is not a resource or a landscape for my enjoyment. It's something alive that is speaking to me, and that is actually in conversation with my unconscious. But we do try not to, because one of the things, I think that's the last thing I want to say about this, but we've been told that that human beings are the youngest of the species, and Western culture is the youngest of the cultures, right? And in that sense, Western culture needs to mature. So it cannot just go to the uncle and auntie cultures and just appropriate what they have and just transport it here. But the uncles and aunties have a very important role in offering direction, not necessarily guidance. That's the difference. right? So we're looking for direction, and the direction is, without any doubt, responsibility.
Vanessa, I am so, so grateful to you for sharing that, sharing everything. We're coming to an end of our time together. So Joe, I don't know if there's anything you want to say, but I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. That's my chairing, but it was so everything we've got from you, Vanessa, was so rich, and I'm very, very grateful to you, and just grateful that we ended with the aunties and uncles actually as well, you know, because those are, in our communities, those roles, yeah, the direction are so important. So thank you so much. Thank you. Joe, I'm going to pass to you, and Vanessa, if you wanted to say anything before you go.
Do you have any closing remarks, Vanessa? The floor is yours.
No, I think I've spoken enough. Thank you. Probably too much.
Well, thank you both for holding this space. It's been lovely to be a part of, and thank you for your warmth and sharing your stories of personal lived experience as well. And I know everyone's found it really, really moving and a really lovely experience. So thank you again for that wonderful conversation. If you've not bought Vanessa's book, please do check out her book. And if you want to join the Hospicing Modernity Collective, we'll drop a link out to you all on the email as well. But yeah, that's it. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening. You can visit the rest of the Festival of Debate programme on festivalofdebate.com. We've still got a few weeks left of events to go. But thank you very much, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Oh, and Habiba, I love the conversation and the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it so much.
Thanks, everyone. Yes, good night.